I'm going to start by arguing that there are 3 or 4, depending on how you count, sectors that we have to partner in order to be able to do the transition to the low-carbon economy that we've been talking about today. Then I'm going to use the Danish experience to argue why this is so and what the roles are of these different sectors. And at the end of the day, or at the end of my 5 minutes here, I want to go in and talk a little bit about what we might do to make these partnerships work. Now, the 3 sectors that I want to point to, or 4 depending on how you count, is 1, the business sector. That's going to be the locomotive that's going to take us to where we want to go. 2, the policy sector, which actually I'm including here the general public here, because you don't get the policy to do what you need them to do unless they've got the backing of the voters. So I lump them together. Some people might argue that they should be taken apart. The 3rd is the academic community, and I'm going to argue why as I go through this. First of all, there's one big given in all of this discussion that we have today, which hasn't been explicitly expressed. It's probably been implicit in some of what's been said. But basically, a very simple understanding, and thank goodness Nick Stern is gone, because this is a biologist talking about economics. A very simple understanding of supply and demand tells us that sooner or later, we will have to remove fossil fuels from our energy system. The price will become too great. And so the simple economists would say, well, we'll wait until the price gets too high before we worry about it. Well, there are 2 problems with that approach. One is energy infrastructure is incredibly long-lived. It's like 40 or 50 years. So you have to be pretty damn sure of what the price is going to be the next 40 years in order to be able to make good decisions. The other is that there is a geopolitical relationship with some of the fossil fuels, which means that even though they technically may be on the planet, they may be difficult to get a hold of. And energy security has a value, even though I've never seen an economic model that puts it in. So, knowing all of this, the Danish government in 2008 established a commission to examine when Denmark could become independent of fossil fuels, or if the technology was there, when could it happen and what would it cost? And for all of my sins, and apparently there are a lot of them, I was the chairman of that commission. There were 10 people on the commission, 5 economists, and again, it's a good thing Nick is gone, but if I learned nothing else, I discovered economy is not an exact science. So what we did was we said, okay, we know we're going to have to get rid of these fossil fuels. We don't know when. But we do know that the EU has said an 80 to 95% emissions reduction in 2050. Looking at the profile of Denmark's emissions, we could say there's absolutely no chance whatsoever that we can reach an 80% reduction unless we remove essentially all fossil fuels. So we said, okay, can we do it unless CCS becomes viable? But since we don't know that it does, and we wanted to give our government a firm answer to the question, we said, okay, let's see if we could do this by 2050. And it turned out, when we did all the economics, and they did this wonderful model, and then they didn't like the results because it showed there was no price difference, even using the sort of conservative estimates of what's going to happen to fossil fuel prices by the International Energy Agency. There was no price difference between going green or... So they said, this can't be right, because everybody knows it's dead expensive. So they did it all again, another way. This is the exact science part. Same answer. So we got 2 different economic studies that showed if you integrate the energy costs over the next 40 years for Denmark, there's no difference. This all ended up with it being the official goal. The official, legally accepted goal for Denmark is to remove fossil fuels from its energy system, including transport, by 2050. It's the only country in the world, as far as I know, that has that goal. Now, a lot of people today have been talking about how quickly their countries or their regions are running, but there hasn't been a lot of talk about where they're running to. Lots of times we've been focusing on emissions reductions by a certain time, but believe me, emissions reductions are only treating the symptom, they're not treating the cause. And we've seen with the discussion on biodiesel in Europe right now, if you only focus on the emissions, then you can run down some dead ends. So everything we do in Denmark at the moment, when we make a climate initiative, we think it through in terms of what it means for the 2050 goal. Not only is this the government's, not the government's, the parliament's goal, but the initial steps, the framework to do this, have also been accepted legally by 172 out of 179 votes in Parliament. And getting to the role of the general population, a survey of the general population right after our report came out said that 9 out of 10 Danes wanted to be independent of fossil fuels. Most Danes, most adult Danes, remember the oil crisis in the 1970s that brought the country to its knees. They know what energy security means. So in Denmark right now, we have this vision. And this vision, or goal, which is legal, has made a huge difference on the business sector. Because the business sector wants a stable framework. That's the policy job. The politician's job is to make the framework for the market to work. We want market mechanisms to deliver the good, but there's no such thing as a free market. There goes the biologist again. There's no such thing as a free market. It's all regulated. So we need the politicians to make the regulation that makes this sensible. Now, given that the government has agreed, 172 out of 179 votes, that we're going to get fossil fuels out of the energy system by 2050, how much money do you think you can mobilize in Denmark to invest in coal infrastructure? None. And our largest energy company, talking about energy companies, our largest energy company has the goal of producing 85% of its energy from renewables by 2040. This is not about picking the winner. This is about identifying the loser. A couple of people today have been talking about, well, we don't know what the right energy mix is. No, we don't know what the right energy mix is in 2050. Nobody does, because the market has to let it evolve. At the moment, Denmark also has a goal that, again, 172 out of 179 politicians said yes to, of 50% of our electricity has to come from wind by 2020. And you say, oh, well, you know, you're picking the winner then, you're picking wind. No, we know that wind is going to have to come in much more into the system. And right now in Denmark, wind is the one that is closest to being economically viable compared to coal. In fact, on land, it is viable compared to coal. Unfortunately, most people don't want windmills in their backyard, so we're putting it at sea, which makes it a little bit more expensive. Never mind that. So we have... Oh, and the other thing I should probably say is that we have the technology to do it today in Denmark. We need to continue to do research because it will get better, it'll get cheaper, and it'll get more efficient. But we could do it today if we had to do it. So saying that we need to do research before we can do this is not an excuse. Of course we need research, but it's not an excuse for not doing anything. So we're sitting here in this situation. Ultimately, our energy system in 2050, nobody knows what it's going to look like. The market's going to figure out what it's going to look like because the industries that can pay will go together to make it happen. And people say to me, well, you know, you'll never make it. Well, maybe not. We might not make it by 2050. But the fact that we've said that we are trying to get there, and we're planning to get there, makes it that we're going to be one heck of a lot closer than the countries that aren't planning for this transition when we get to 2050, even if we don't make it all the way. Now, just to finish off, how can we make some of these partnerships work between the academic community, the political community, and the business community? Well, one of the things that we talk a lot about is public-private partnerships. And mostly when we think public-private partnerships, we think business and we think policy or local municipalities and ESCO projects and so on. But in fact, I think it's very important that we partner in the academic community. Why do I say that? I had a discussion with a guy from the Asian Development Bank, and he said, you know, we need to mobilize private money as well. We don't have the money to do this. Can you promise me that the models that you use for public-private partnerships in Europe work in Africa, or work in India, or work wherever? No, nobody can, but there's data out there, and we need the academic community to have a look and to try and support the decisions that are being made. We've also established at my own university, and I'm the leader of it, something called the Sustainability Science Center. And it is to do research. Yes, you have those at universities, but it's also a door. So businesses can come in and say, listen, We have a sustainable problem. We need this whole picture about what we're doing, where it fits in, and we don't have that knowledge in our boardroom. Can you help me find it at your university? And I go out and find a professor from medicine and a professor from climate and a professor from economy and put them together, and they sit down with the company and do some scenarios about what might happen in the future. Now, I'm very sorry, because I'm not even going to try and go on board pronouncing your name. But you mentioned, this is our not-so-traditional bank manager, or bank man that we had on the last panel. You mentioned that getting like people together, or like-minded together, was a partnership, or a way that we could go in partnership. And you mentioned cities or whatever. And I think you're right. I think that's a really interesting way to go. But I think it's important that we remember these three sectors that I've talked about. So yes, let's make a matrix and start putting together the 3 different sectors within all the little different boxes. And I think we may get some dialogue that can really take us somewhere.